Hello F1 fans, welcome back to the F1 Masters podcast brought to you by AUBG Daily. As usual, you're with me, Vasco, David and Harry, and today we'll be discussing the events during the Brazil Grand Prix weekend. Let's jump to the practice session with absolutely nothing interesting apart from the Ferrari 1-2, and go to the qualifying session, which was a bit more interesting.
One of the highlights was that McLaren had a bad strategy. Everyone expected them to be like in the top 5 probably, but then they left their cars to leave the pit lane like in the last possible moment, and we all know that in the end of Q3 there was a massive storm and the conditions were really worse than before. Also, Oscar Piastri had an off-track excursion. Another highlight was the AlphaTauri Q1 exit, as we saw that later in the weekend they actually had a good pace.
Yeah, moving on to the sprint shootout for Saturday, we had an incident between Fernando Alonso and Esteban Ocon, moving on, we also had the two Aston Martins finishing third and fourth, which was more than a surprise, I can say, for every Formula 1 fan. And Lance Stroll was the lead car, which was even more surprising. And also we had Oscar Piastri going off the track and pretty much ending the session for everyone.
We also had penalties for impending of George Russell, Pierre Gasly and Esteban Ocon, but that didn't have that big of an impact for them during the weekend. Moving to the sprint shootout, also, it was interesting, a bit different from the qualifying session, because we saw both AlphaTauris in the Q3 session, Ricciardo 8, Yuki Tsunoda 6, and we had a pattern like Lando Norris pole position, after that the 2 Red Bulls and 2 Mercedes. Poor sprint shootout for Ferrari, but we saw at the sprint that they wanted to keep their car for the race, but as we saw later in the weekend, that did not really happen. And probably the highlight and the most important thing from the sprint shootout was that crash between Fernando Alonso and Esteban Ocon. The stewards, they said it was a racing incident, but Ocon, he blamed it on Fernando Alonso, and Fernando Alonso, I don't think he said anything like to blame Ocon, but we saw that there was tension between the two pilots. But as we saw, that wasn't like really important part of the weekend of both pilots.
Yep, and moving on to the sprint, the start of the sprint was interesting. We had both Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton gaining positions, and Max Verstappen led the race from then onwards. Lewis Hamilton was in P3, but then later on he fell down the order because the Mercedes did not have good pace around this track. We'll also talk about it later on. There were some interesting battles around the 10th place, featuring drivers like Daniel Rick, Oscar Piastri, Alonso, and Gasly, Ocon, so on. And yeah, also overall it was an interesting sprint race, I would say. It was one of the better ones this season. What do you think, guys?
Yeah, it was overall pretty entertaining for a sprint race. We saw the Mercedes get really good starts and then just fall off a cliff completely. And we also saw a good pace from the AlphaTauris, Yuki Tsunoda finishing 6th in the sprint, gaining another solid 3 points for AlphaTauri, which will be pretty crucial in their battle to overhaul Williams for 7th in the constructors.
Something interesting that I noticed during the sprint race was that the gaps between AlphaTauri and Ferrari were minimal, and we could have easily seen like Yuki Tsunoda being 5th or Daniel Ricciardo being 8th. So really great pace. I don't know what was wrong with them in the qualifying session, but overall, that sprint shootout and the sprint, they were great for both AlphaTauris. And if we didn't see that mistake last weekend in Mexico from Yuki Tsunoda, I think right now we could have been talking about a possible one place gained in the Constructors' Championship from AlphaTauri.
And now we'll move on to the main race on Sunday, and we'll start off with our podium finishers. So in first First place, once again, Max Verstappen. Second place, Lando Norris. And third place, after a crazy photo finish, it was Fernando Alonso back on the podium for the first time in a while. And we had quite a few DNFs, it has to be said. George Russell, Valtteri Bottas, Guan Yu Zhou, Kevin Magnussen, Alex Albon, and Charles Leclerc, who didn't even start the race. So yeah, guys, what do you guys think of the results and how they played out?
Well, let's start our discussion with the Leclerc, who couldn't start it like us.
Yeah, I mean, really unfortunate. When we all saw him into the wall, we were shocked, especially Ferrari fans. We have one here. How did you react to it?
I mean, I was absolutely appalled. I was so frustrated. I was very excited for the start of the race because Charles, starting on the front row after a great qualifying, huge opportunity, especially as we saw how bad the Mercedes was. Huge opportunity for Ferrari to gain a big chunk of points, and then it all goes away on the formation lap, not even at the start of the race, on the formation lap. And apparently he had issues with his hydraulics of the car, which resulted in him spinning into the wall and then just pretty much wandering through the Brazilian jungle. But it was just disappointing and a shame to see, and there was an empty grid slot. It's not the first time Charles left an empty grid slot in a race, but it's just frustrating as a Ferrari fan.
Very tough luck for him, and once again, everything for Ferrari goes wrong. Their car wasn't great during the whole weekend, apart from the first practice session. But overall, not a great weekend for Ferrari again, but not a great weekend also for Alex Albon and Nico Hülkenberg and their incident in the opening lap of the race, even before the first corner. After that, we saw that they destroyed the race of Daniel Ricciardo also, and tough luck, I can say, for Oscar Piastri. So we saw before the first corner of the race, we had virtually 5 of the drivers out. That was a great opportunity for some of the teams to capitalize points, but we saw that probably the only winners from that, there's a lot of DNS and one Leclerc who didn't even start it. The only winners were actually probably Alpine and Yuki Tsunoda with his 2 points.
I agree with your opinion, and it was quite an unfortunate incident. It was a sandwich incident. We have seen a lot of those in the past. They just didn't leave each other enough space, and yeah, there were, as you said, more drivers who participated, even though they were ahead of the 3 cars that sandwiched. And moving on, the second start was calmer, nothing that interesting happened. And then throughout the race, I mean, I have to speak of Mercedes being really bad this weekend, as their car was just awful on the straight. They don't have straight line speeds. It was painful to watch them being overtaken by everyone virtually. It was just Checo Perez, also Pierre Gasly, Sainz, everyone is just I mean, Russell even DNF'd. It was I don't know what exactly type of problem. It was a technical issue, I guess, but it was just painful. And yeah, Lewis Hamilton finished the race, but it was a lowly 8th place. I mean, I am so disappointed in Mercedes this weekend, honestly. I just don't know if I have to comment further.
Yeah, I was dumbfounded by Mercedes. Why were they so bad at a track that they crushed last year? 1-2 in the race, and this weekend they barely finished in the points with one of the cars. The other car didn't even finish the race, but I think that even if George Russell finished the race, he probably wasn't even going to get points anyways. That's how slow he was. It was almost like Mercedes swapped bodies with Ferrari, and they did everything that Ferrari does on a weekly basis, except they decided to do it this weekend for some reason. I don't know why they had no pace. This is very concerning for them, especially to end the season very poorly. But I just think that they should bounce back from this in Las Vegas and Abu Dhabi. This car has been very good the last few races before Brazil, so I don't see a reason for them to continue being this awful for the future.
Well, we will see what is going to happen with Mercedes. Also, double DNF for Valtteri Bottas and Guan Yu Zhou, and that crisis that seems to be throughout the whole season in Alfa Romeo seems to continue. So this team, if they're not going to improve during the next year, I think there are going to be a lot of problems there. And we saw this race that is like a typical poor race from Alfa Romeo. And right now, nobody is surprised when their weekend just goes straight down and down and down. And moving on to the surprise, probably, of the weekend, that Aston Martin looked like their first races of the season. They looked good again, and very good qualifying session, and very good race overall for both pilots of Aston Martin, with Fernando Alonso keeping that third position and Sir Lancelot Stroll being fifth.
Yeah, Aston Martin, they blew everyone out of the park. That was just a flawless performance. Not one mistake from either of them the whole weekend. And Alonso was on the verge of losing that podium, but he just snatched it from Sergio Perez at the line. And it was really, really nice to see Fernando back on the podium after a frustrating second half of the season for him, I'm sure. But this just goes to show that what if Aston Martin never put those upgrades on the car? They turned out to be downgrades for them. And maybe if they kept the base car from the car that they had from Bahrain, they could be still ahead of McLaren in the Constructors' Championship. So it just goes to show that their R&D department is not the best.
I'm not entirely sure about that, because McLaren, they had like a big step up during the season with these upgrades, and these upgrades for Aston Martin, they were planned, and we thought that they're going to improve and be even better, or even if they're not the second best car throughout the whole season, we didn't expect that they're going to drop that much in the order. But do you know what Fernando Alonso said during this Grand Prix weekend? He said, we're a young team and everything. Nobody has to take a blame for anything throughout the season, because people are still learning. They're not that big of a crew there. I think there are like 500 or 600 people. For example, Williams, they have like 700-800 people. Red Bull, they have like more than 1,000 people. So I think if they're going to be engaged, like everybody to be engaged in that team and wants to be involved in the development, I think there are going to be some good things waiting in the future for Aston Martin. They just have to think more and see what are the problems and go. I think they're going to improve in the future for sure. So we don't have to be that critical of them during the season, and we see there are some good races like that one that are giving hope to their fans and to the whole structure there at Aston Martin.
Yeah, but still, this team looked like it was on track to potentially finish second or third in the Constructors at the start of the season, and to fall that many places is, you have to say, disappointing considering the start of the season.
Well, disappointing, but that is how you learn. And if they learn from their mistakes and make even better car, with them having Fernando Alonso and one Stroll, who is like, we all know that he's not the best pilot, but when he's given the opportunity, he can take it. So I think there is a lot of room for improvement in Aston Martin if they learn from their mistakes. But moving on to the most interesting battle probably left in the championship, with 2 races to go, there are only 6 points separating Fernando Alonso, Lando Norris, and Carlos Sainz in the drivers' standings.
Yeah. Who do we think is gonna finish on top? I most likely think it'll be Lando Norris.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. I can see it happening because McLaren are having a really good car at the moment. So.
Yeah, I've said it not once, twice, but like 1,000 times that I think Lando, with that great of a car, with his performances, with his talent, he's going to go for that fourth place. But I also think Fernando Alonso will be fifth in the standings. I just don't believe in Ferrari anymore.
Really, 6 points. You don't think Carlos Sainz can jump that?
I already told you, I don't believe in Ferrari anymore. And if Aston Martin have that strong of a car in the next two races, I think it is going to be like not that hard for Fernando Alonso. It's not like I like Carlos Sainz, but I don't think the Ferrari car has what is needed. But we'll see, there are two races left. Moving on to another topic with Alpine, double points, Pierre Gasly 7th with 6 points, and Esteban Ocon the last place in the points with 1 point. But not a bad weekend for Alpine. I don't know what is their development plan for the next season, because we should start talking about that. They don't seem to progress at all, but we never know. And with two great pilots, I think, with Pierre Gasly having like a good season and Esteban Ocon having an alright season, although his penalties, his tough luck sometimes, I think if Alpine make that much needed step up, they're not going to be bad in the future. And this race shows that they have the pilots, they have the crew, the strategy wasn't bad, but there is something missing in that car.
They also have a lot of money now. They got a lot of investors over the course of this season. And this isn't exactly a small team, of course, formerly Renault. This is still a factory team with their own engine. So I think that they have the resources, but it's just whether they're able to use those resources to their advantage.
Well, yeah, we'll see, as I said. Let's move on to the highlights of the weekend. David, what is your highlight of this weekend? The most memorable thing?
The most memorable thing is Aston Martin's pace. They were fantastic in qualifying, unlucky in the sprint qualifying, but it didn't really matter for them. The main focus was the race, and they managed to finish with some really good points. So I think that hats off to Aston Martin.
I also think it was surprising and actually really interesting that Aston Martin made it, like had that good of a race. But my highlight of the weekend is the sprint race, because I expected it to be boring as the last few sprint races. But we had some drama and we had some interesting racing, maybe because of the track, because Brazil is probably the best track, in my opinion, for sure. So the sprint race wasn't that bad, and that surprised me and was even more interesting than the race, personal opinion. So yeah, that is my highlight of the weekend. Harry?
I have an interesting take this time. I would say that Logan Sargent almost getting points. He was P11. That was a highlight because I didn't expect it, honestly. I mean, Williams, they were not doing that well this weekend, so that's quite impressive from Logie Sarge. I mean,
well, 11th place for Logan Sargent is like a podium finish for him, so. But moving on to the surprises and disappointments of the weekend, Harry, let's again start with you. What was your most surprising and most disappointing thing throughout this whole weekend?
My surprise, it's Lance Stroll, because he didn't do anything wrong. He had an, I think, almost flawless weekend. He just did what was expected. He used the performance of the car. He even out-qualified Fernando Alonso, which is really impressive. And his race was really good. He was P5, which is really solid. And the disappointment, it has to be Mercedes. I mean, I am so good at that. Their pace was really bad. I mean, I expected a lot from Mercedes this weekend. I expected at least a podium, honestly. But yeah.
Yeah, my surprise was Aston Martin. I already mentioned in the highlight, but super, super impressive results considering the last few races, how bad they've been. My disappointment is Ferrari because they just were bad. And yes, Mercedes were also very bad, but Ferrari weren't particularly impressive either. Carlos Sainz P6 and Charles doesn't even get to start the race. That I would not even call a successful weekend by any stretch of the imagination.
My surprise is AlphaTauri, and although they took only 2 points in the race, they had good sprint race, and their car looks better with every race. And the disappointment, I can say either Mercedes or Ferrari. I would say Mercedes because of their race pace, that was horrible. But yeah, Ferrari, they're not that far behind. And moving on to our predictions from the last week and our predictions for the next race. I'll start with my really bad prediction from the last week that the sprint race will be boring with almost no overtakes. Well, that wasn't the truth, but I'm pleased with that this prediction did not happen because we saw one of the few interesting sprint races since the inclusion of this format in the F1. And the second prediction was at least one McLaren will be on the podium, and that is successful with Lando Norris taking the second place during the Sao Paulo Grand Prix. And my predictions for the next week are that both Haas cars will be last in the order of the race in the end, which with their poor performances during the last weekends and we can say from the start of the season, won't be that surprising. And the other one, which is a bit more bold, is that 3 out of the 4 cars of the teams AlphaTauri and Williams will be part of Q3. So I'll be waiting to see that with that fast straight speed of Williams and with that improving performance from AlphaTauri, I won't be surprised to see that. And the fourth pilot that is going to be out will be just unlucky. I won't say who it is going to be.
Yeah, we'll have to figure that one out. But my predictions for Brazil, Hamilton win. We can just move on. And Yuki Tsunoda, best of the rest. Is that true? Not really. What do you guys think? Is that justifiable for any point? He had a good race.
I think you deserve half a point for that because of the efforts of AlphaTauri and Yuki. And this is like almost like the Logan Sargent 11th place, which is like a podium finish for him. And to have a great result in the sprint race and be 9th during the race, I think Yuki Tsunoda deserves to be praised for his performances. So yeah, we can give you half a point.
I'll take it. I'll take the points. But my predictions for Las Vegas is that the race will be a complete failure. Not only that it will be a bad race, but it's going to be embarrassing for F1 fans and F1 and the sport as a whole because I have such low expectations for this event, and judging by the build-up for it, I'm also not confident that the organizers will be able to deliver a good enough event. But that's my first prediction. My second prediction, quite surprising maybe, but Lando Norris to finish outside of the top 5. Considering the form he's been on, that would be almost impossible. But I'm expecting Norris to perhaps have some trouble in Vegas.
That is possible because we don't really know what is it going to be like at that Las Vegas circuit. So there is chance for something strange, something surprising to happen. So we'll see.
At the end of the day, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. So we will see.
Well, my predictions, I better not discuss them too much because it was Nico Hülkenberg getting points and Logan Sargent into Q3. Horrible predictions. Moving on. My predictions for Vegas are Williams getting points. I rely on the fact that the circuit has many straights and Williams have a top speed, so yeah. And Ferrari podium. We'll see about that. I'm not sure if it's gonna happen.
Hopefully it does happen, but yeah.
Yeah. And this is all for today from us, guys. We're looking forward to the next race week. Till then, like, subscribe, and follow us on AUBG Daily on Instagram and Facebook, and stay tuned for more of our content.
Thank you. And remember, if you no longer go for a gap that exists,
You're no longer a racing driver.